Good evening, all. I'm Anya Larkin from the Centre for Visual Culture at the University of Aberdeen. A very warm welcome to this painting music event and to Aberdeen if you're not in the northeast of Scotland. This event has been organised by the George Washington Wilson Centre for Visual Culture based here at the university. And we are absolutely delighted to have Kate Steenhauer, Dr. Andrew Starkey and Jack Caven with us to present their film and discuss this fascinating project that they've been working on together. We're going to have a screening of the film with a discussion by Kate, Andrew and Jack, which will be followed by a question and answer session. So I'll be keeping an eye on the question and answer and chat functions. So please, if you have any questions for Kate, Andrew and Jack, please feel free to post them in the question and answer box, which is at the bottom of your screen next to. So preferably question and answer rather than chat, but I will keep an eye on both of those. So I'm Anya Larkin. Sorry for those of you who weren't here earlier when I introduced myself. I'm Anya Larkin, senior lecturer here in the French department and co-director with Dr. Katja Krylova of the George Washington Wilson Centre for Visual Culture. So I'd like to just briefly introduce Kate, Andrew and Jack before we go any further. Dr. Andrew Starkey is a senior lecturer here at the University of Aberdeen in the School of Engineering. He has over 20 years of experience in artificial intelligence, and his research focus is in automated data analysis using AI techniques, explainable AI, I'd love to know what that means, virtual reality and autonomous learning for robots. Kate Steenhauer is a visual artist whose practice explores the dynamic and interactive capacity of drawing in dialogue with other art forms, technology, and their relationship with its audience. Her works look to move the traditionally static experience of visual art into a dynamic art form that is temporal, transient, and transformational. She works collaboratively with dance, opera, music, sound, verbatim, and artificial intelligence. These productions can be viewed through the mediums of theatre, film, live audiovisual installations, and artwork. And finally, Jack Caven is a current software engineer and aspiring entrepreneur. He has recently graduated from the University of Aberdeen, where he completed a master's in mechanical engineering. For his final honours year thesis, Jack undertook the challenge of applying artificial intelligence to convert the process of a painting being constructed into music. This project has since turned into his very first entrepreneurial endeavour, which is painting music. Welcome to you all.
Thank you. Kate, do you want to kick us off with a description of your work and background?
Yeah, thanks, Ain. Right. To me, drawing is the purest form of art. The artist cannot hide behind bright colors, layers of paint, or printmaking techniques. What you draw and then how you draw it, but also equally significant what you don't draw and how you do that. The artist is fully exposed. I'm a very rational person. I have, for instance, a master's in civil engineering from the Delft University of Technology and a PhD in coastal engineering from the University of Aberdeen. To me, engineering certainly does not lack the need for creative input, and I apply a degree of engineering to my art. In history, many artists have approached their techniques or subject matter scientifically, to name but a few: Turner to color, Constable to weather, or Da Vinci to anatomy. My art certainly has a rational framework. Everything begins with why, but why does this work and why doesn't that work? And also with I wonder if I apply this, would it be better? Would it have more meaning or be more interesting? So how can we do this? Within this framework, I work free. So in Aberdeen, I was taught how to draw. After my engineering degree, I received private tuition from several well-established artists. Drawing's like a sport. You need to do it every day, practice and train the hand-eye coordinations. It keeps the senses sharp and fine-tuned. And drawing from life is the best. In Aberdeen, I learned how to make a picture, how to tell a story. A lot of my work focuses on people, my manis, as my colleagues refer to them. I like it when they're at their best, most natural, absorbed in work and play, and at one with their environment. In Aberdeen, I discovered how to collaborate as a visual artist with other artists, other disciplines. Initially isolated in my studio, I had no idea or even contemplated the possibilities. How do you collaborate as a visual artist? With National Theatre of Scotland, I developed an interdisciplinary approach involving live drawing in Japanese ink, unfolding on a screen projected via projector, and interacting with a narrative on stage. This experience inspired me to think that drawing would be able to interact with, well, maybe anything. Possibilities all of a sudden seemed immense. Visual art does not need to be static. It can be an evolving and interactive art form. The fluidity of a painted drawing lends itself very much for performative application, outputs in film, theater, live installation, and many collaborations followed rapidly all of a sudden with collaborations with dancers, performers, composers, writers. Feedback from these productions often focuses on the trance-like state of people, that the trance-like state that people enter when they watch the live drawing on a screen, on the experience of figuring out what I'm drawing, and on the, in particular, the compelling combination of drawing and music. So why is that? I wondered. I talked about this to a friend, Rafi, also a PhD graduate from the School of Engineering, and an honorable mention, long overdue. He suggested to talk to our mutual friend, Andy. Many artists have examined multi-sensory ways of perceiving. Analogy between art and sound has been played with, but now with cutting-edge artificial intelligence techniques available, can we approach the relation between art and music more scientifically? So, and Andy was up for the challenge. And, you know, but to home in on the truth of the matter, AI is an incredibly hot topic. And I'm basically trying to tag along with the cool kids, Jack and Andy. But my undercover mission is, however, to bring to the attention the art of drawing, in particular figurative drawing, and show how interactive and dynamic this art form can be. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, okay. And I think, Kate, your passion comes through every time I hear you talk about your art. It always inspires me. And that's what happened in our very first meeting when we talked about this, when, as you say, after Ravi suggested we meet up, and we had some discussions, and you talked about the same concepts and ideas then. So that was hugely inspiring, exhilarating for me to explore this intellectual kind of idea. So the idea of marrying the worlds of music and painting together is enormously ambitious. I mean, let's not you know, downplay it. It's very difficult to try and do this, and creating new music is very, very difficult. And the idea behind what we discussed was that Kate's art is, like she said, it's transient. It's something that she does on a stage. It's something that you can watch, and you can watch these painted marks transform into something that is magical and beautiful. And we also wanted to have a musical representation of what Kate was painting. And in order to do that, we had to develop an artificial intelligence kind of approach that would allow us to do that. But we also wanted to tackle the question of AI itself. AI is increasingly prevalent in today's society. So we wanted to address from the very beginning, and this was from the very first meeting, we talked about, well, what about the question of, is AI good or bad? And that is almost a subjective point of view. It might depend on how you might want to use it. In some areas, it's very much a positive thing. In other areas, you might think it's a threat. Certainly the way the media talk about it, they talk about lots of threats from AI in terms of losing your job or things like this. And the evidence doesn't actually bear that out. However, we wanted to examine that question in an artistic way. So we wanted to marry these things together. We wanted to produce music. We wanted to go through a process that allowed some of the limitations of AI to be explored. So we weren't looking for necessarily a perfect output or a perfect musical story coming out. And you might hear some of that in the film. And the film, when we get to it, which is just a couple of minutes away, the music, all the music you hear, all the notes are produced by the AI. Everything within it is produced by the AI. But at this point, I suppose we should bring in Jack and ask him how he got involved in the project.
So, like I said, as my part of my thesis, I got to start this project. Really interesting. At first, when I first met Andy, we discussed it was basically a project around artificial intelligence. I wasn't quite certain about what sort of angle or what the project details were, and I got offered three or four different scenarios. I took probably it took 24 hours to get back to Andy, but I do believe within like the first, say, 10-20 minutes, I was convinced that this was the right route for myself. It was something so different around what I'd previously been learning throughout uni. It was in one word to describe it, absolutely outrageous, but I absolutely loved the idea of it. So I immediately went back and said, yep, this is what I want to do. Artificial intelligence itself, really, really interesting concept. So that's why I chose it in the first place. And then this project, the description totally had me hooked within the first, like I said, first 5-10 minutes. And I see that a lot within other people when I speak about the project itself. And seeing that similar reaction really kind of excites me to take it further. And this is why I would like to work on it on a full-time basis if that ever became possible. So this is the road to go down for sure. Absolutely love it. And yeah, excited for everyone to see the movie as well.
So I guess we'll move on to the movie. After the movie, Jack and I will talk through, I guess, how we did the music and so on, and how it kind of works from a technical perspective, but not too deep. But we'll give a brief description of how we do it after the movie. But I guess, Kate, over to you to show the movie.
Yeah, the movie is about 20 minutes, and I'll start sharing my screen.
Can artificial intelligence replace a human? You're about to witness the results of artificial intelligence being used to create music from art. There are similarities between art and music. White space on a canvas is similar to silence in music. Highly detailed artwork is like an intricate melody. We can measure the white space on the canvas and input it into a computer brain. These inputs are like the sensory inputs we take for granted: sights, sounds, taste, touch. Based on these sensory inputs, the computer brain can then make decisions on what type of music to produce. Our brains have 100 billion neurons. The computer brain has 25 neurons. What can 25 neurons accomplish? It can still make decisions, and it has learned to understand these artworks by analysing over 1,000 images being painted. It then creates notes based on what it has previously learned and what it sees in the painted object. Is the computer brain showing intelligence?
So the project is made up of a number of components. Those components are related to the image analysis of what Kate creates on the page, on the canvas, and then converting that into things that can then be converted into something that becomes music. And that's where the artificial intelligence comes in. So it is the brain that converts that image analysis into something that is music.
Computers do not have physical neurons. It is a program. It mimics how our neurons work, and it achieves this by using mathematical formulae that approximate the process that takes place inside our heads. The neurons in the computer, therefore, are made up of numbers and not chemical reactions. These numbers represent the amount of white space on the canvas, how grey the picture is, or how complex the image that is painted. Each neuron in the computer brain then becomes an expert in identifying one aspect of the painting. We can use this knowledge to convert what the neuron tells us into music. The white space is like silence in music. The amount of grey is like the octaves to play. The intricacy of the painted object is like the intricacy of a melody. The computer has also learned musical structure like chords and harmonies in music and how to use them. It does this based on how the painting develops, so you'll hear the music grow and change as the canvas becomes more full. How much further can the AI go? Could it learn from an audience reaction to improve the music it creates? Can it learn from itself? Could it start to produce a new form of music? And what of other developments in AI? Companies are using AI to monitor and respond to how we interact with our world. This AI has been exploited to shape our thoughts and our discussions, to provoke discord and disagreement, or perhaps there was none.
Is your AI making art?
It's quite a subjective one, actually, question. I mean, well, if you view music as a form of art, then I would say yes. Marrying visual art and music is a form of art in itself, and I think that's why it's a world's first. Nobody's ever done something like this, but the people have tried, but not in the way that we're doing. So we're taking it from a certain angle, and I think that's probably. That's probably the coolest part about the project. Yeah, we're kind of making our own art, our own style, our own performance. It's totally unique to us and the project, and that's pretty cool to be a part of, for sure.
How do we learn? As children, we learn through play. We play with our environment. If it is a game, we try to win. We improve every time we play. We learn, and we like winning. And we hate losing. If we gain knowledge through play, is playing a sign of intelligence? Have we as humans evolved to be able to play with the world around us? How can a computer learn? How can a computer play? If it plays, does it like to win? Does it not want to lose? How can a computer understand our world? How can it interact with our world?
The idea really started with that music and drawing is quite a compelling combination, and the analogy between the two art forms is quite astonishing. And then it really developed on how can we compare this, or how can we correlate this, and in a more scientific manner, so in a fairly cold kind of approach. So this is how I got talking to Andy about it, and how we could apply this in terms of AI.
In the most simplest terms, the system produces music which has been driven by visual art. So essentially what's been made is a correlation between musical attributes and art attributes. So for instance, we took the frequency of a specific shape in one of the art pieces that Kate has painted, and that specific shape will have attributes. We've correlated that to music attributes, and then that's what allows the music to be made. So as a painting's been developed, more things have been added on to the music as it goes on.
Humans are physical. We have hands, we have eyes and ears. I can touch, I can feel, I can see, I can hear. My world is infinite. I have emotions, I can laugh, I can cry, I can be nervous or excited. Computers are digital. They have no hands, no eyes, no ears, unless we give it to them. Computers have no emotions. They cannot laugh. They cannot cry, nor understand what it is to be sad. How then does the AI judge the music that it creates? Its world is binary. 0 or 1. Yes or no. On or off. How can humans and artificial intelligence speak together? Will we ever have a common language? A common culture? Is artificial intelligence really intelligent? Or just a poor imitation of ours? Can we join together in a community?
So Kate's art is very much a performance art. So that's the first thing. So the starting point was something that was going to be a live performance. Then the whole idea of having AI working in real time. So this is not something that's recorded. We do not know what the AI will produce in music. And every time we do it, it is different because the AI is choosing what to play based on what Kate paints. And Kate also is not painting exactly the same thing each time. So there's an element of risk, an element of danger in there so the audience can or maybe understand some of that. But it means then that what's created is absolutely novel each time. And that then is a performance. And that lends itself to being done live.
My secret mission is really to get people to look at drawings. Drawings are often underrated and undervalued, even in the art community. Drawings, you don't see a lot of drawings on the wall. And drawings have such a simple beauty. I think I like to make people watch drawings and see what I see. So in the performance, people are watching at drawings, but the drawings are evolving as well. So that is something that I've been told that it has quite a mesmerizing quality, and especially in combination with music.
Is it a new art form? I mean, art is often thought as a static thing on a wall. And what Kate's doing is dynamic. It's interactive with the audience. And that's the painting itself. Then we have the element of music, which adds another layer. And if the AI can interpret what Kate's doing in a way that musically sounds interesting, then that brings it a whole different level to the performance. So that's the future direction we want to take. We want to enhance that. We want to improve the way in which the music is created and the types of music that we can do.
A change is coming, a revolution, an evolution, a technological arms race. Should we welcome what is coming with open arms? Or should it worry us, make us anxious? Is this the dawn of a new age of man? A combination of humans and the digital world with artificial intelligence? Can we keep control of our world that we shaped for so long? Or will it now start to shape us?
I see the AI's function as a tool, a digital tool. I'm purely interested in the correlation and how it's established that between art and music. Many artists have looked into multisensory ways of perceiving, and lots of people have tried to establish relationships between drawings and sound, for instance. But none so far as I know have used AI techniques. especially techniques that Annie uses.
AI is a very hot topic at the moment. There's lots of chat about it in the media. There's we see it in lots of companies saying they do it. But there's also a big misunderstanding of what AI actually is. So there is a question of, is AI something to be scared of? Is it something that we should be worried about? Or is it something that we can embrace? And I think some of those questions are a little bit unanswered. And certainly in the music, sometimes you can hear an edge of an element of danger in the music that's created by the AI. Sometimes it doesn't sound pleasant. Sometimes it sounds a little bit unpleasant. And that's the AI deciding that. So because of that, the piece is artistic in that way, because it's down to the listener to decide whether they think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Some people might like it. Some people might not like it. There isn't necessarily a single right answer to that. Okay, thanks, Kate. So what I was going to do before we move on to the Q&A is just Jack and I really to just give a brief description of the process and kind of what we did to get to that point. So to the system that we built that allowed us to do that. So there's a couple of slides. I'm sure you're all sick of slides, but let's just put a few slides up because it will show, I think, allow us to talk around them and show you what we were doing. So this is one of the things at the heart of the process, really. And this is very subjective. So this came out of conversations with Kate and also Jack doing some analysis in this area. So what we tried to look at was what things can we measure in the artwork, and then what is a corollary in the music in the music domain. Now these relationships that we've made on, it's not a hard and fast rule. This is just our interpretation of these things. You could make a different interpretation and come up with different combinations of these parameters against each other. But this is what we use to try to build the AI system. So what the AI system does is we have, and Jack can talk a bit about this, but we took many thousands of images that Kate had given to us, thankfully, from previous artworks that she had done. So it was all from her art. And from that, Jack did some analysis, which allowed him to extract these type of attributes from the artwork. That is fed into the AI brain. So the AI learns the attributes from the painted works of art and starts to understand which artworks are similar to each other and which artworks are different from each other. So when we pass in one of the images of the piece of the art that's done, we are passing in these attributes, which is done by image processing. Then because we have these corollaries, when the AI has made a decision as to what the painting is like, we can then understand what those attributes are in terms of music. And then from that, we can then use that decision made by the artificial intelligence to seed the process of making music. Jack, do you want to comment?
Yeah, so basically, like Andy's probably well described it, but how were we able to do that in real time is probably another aspect that kind of took up a lot of my time personally working on the project. So essentially I had to build a setup for Kate to allow her to perform, which would have been seen on stage during the actual performance. So that kind of comprised of a sort of mechanism that could hold a GoPro camera over the canvas, and essentially this was the input to the process as a whole. So as Kate painted, she would then lean back and I was able to capture an image which was then passed into the AI brain, which would make a decision as to what attributes would then be added to the musical symphony that was already created. And then you've got to ask, well, how does it build up? Well, essentially we had to look at how does musical structure work? And I kind of put in I don't have any musical background, but what I did research, there's a statistical model where you can make decisions based on probabilities. So that's called a Markov chain. And essentially, I was able to pass in music by, I think it was the Beatles and a musical composer called Bach. And essentially, the AI this secondary AI system was able to learn and then basically compare the attributes that were getting passed out and the sort of probabilities to what would sound okay. Because at first, when we did play it, it sounded absolutely awful. And we kind of decided that there needs to be a wee bit of structure in here to kind of make it sound a bit more bearable for the audience. And also that kind of gave birth to we need to help the AI learn how to play music. So the analogy I kind of use is that you put a piano in front of someone like myself that doesn't, when you just say, mash away at the keys, it doesn't sound too great. But then you say, well, hold on, let's restrict these keys to certain keys based on the previous keys. That was quite fast. So yeah, and so therefore it may seem a wee bit unstructured, but it's actually far more structured than it previously was. And that's how we were able to kind of keep a relative musical structure. But I think, Andy, I'll pass it back to you in describing how we are going to evolve this with Mark II.
Yeah. So we've got, so I'm going to move to the presentation. Yeah. So this picture shows the process that Jack described. So initially we had pictures from Kate that had given us, so we had a big library of images, but obviously doing it on stage is a different process where we have to take images live. So starting at the very top circle, you can see that Kate paints an object. So she's starting to paint her whole canvas. Let's say the very first thing that she paints, and she decides that that particular object is complete. So then, like Jack says, she sits backwards and she puts a hand behind her back. That was her cue for Jack to say that she was complete. Jack then told the computer to take a photo from the GoPro camera that was over the canvas. That comes into the computer. There is then image processing that's done on that image. So we convert what is a picture into a number of attributes, which are numbers, which reflect what that image is. That's then passed into the AI. The AI then makes a decision based on what image it is like compared to the images it's seen before. So that's what it does, makes a decision. That decision then comes out, and then, like Jack was saying, it uses this Markov chain. So the Markov chain allows it. So the very first image, what would happen is it would want to try and make some musical motif, so a series of notes. So it would start the process by saying, okay, so is my object low in frequency or is it high in frequency? That would define where it would start from. The Markov chain then would allow it to determine the next notes that it would do. So like Jack said, if we looked at, say, Beatles music, so we'd build a Markov chain based on Beatles music. This allowed us to have some structure based on the types of notes that the Beatles played. So when the Beatles played a certain note, what did they play next? And so that allowed us then to build up some notes based on what had been done previously, whether it's through Beatles or whether it's through Bach or whatever. When it was a second element, so we'd already had an element made, then the motif we make has to get integrated with what's done before. So the decision is then not made on its own. It needs to know what was done before and whether to make a harmony or a chord or whether to make a new motif completely from the beginning. So this process goes round, and Kate, as you can imagine, is taking a few minutes to do each element. So to do a whole canvas could take between 10 and 15 minutes. So that's roughly how long the music has to last for. And the music is layered. So as we go around the circle, we're getting layering of the music on top of each other. So we have a musical motif, maybe a chord, a harmony on top, and then it continues up and up. So the music builds and grows alongside the canvas image that's being created. And in the future, we want to just be better and include, better understanding of the art that Kate's creating, include more attributes that reflect in more detail what Kate is making. So, for example, Kate's talked in the past to us about having an idea of the harmony of the image itself. So is it symmetrical? Other things to do with like a golden circle kind of ratio of the elements within an image. So these sorts of things are things we're going to look at in the future that allows us to bring out more complexity then in the music that is then created. So that's definitely what we want to move forward for. And we also want to look at other types of musical form whether that's simple dance music. And unfortunately, COVID has kind of stymied us a little bit, because we actually had agreements with bars in Aberdeen, and Jack was exploring Glasgow, and I also had conversations with places in Edinburgh where we were going to do the performance in, like, you know, in dance clubs basically, and produce dance music rather than the type of music you heard in the film just there. And so just to finish this part of the process, to explain what's going on, to highlight two images that Kate has created, and to kind of show then the processes that happen. So on the top left, you can see in the community painting that Kate painted, and it was shown in the film, there's a block of paint, which is very simple image. It's really just a rectangular kind of shape. So when that gets analyzed, and it'll have different attributes than the image that's shown on the right hand side, which is showing the like a figure, which is much more sophisticated and has, you know, more twists and turns in it. So it has higher frequencies within it, and it has more white space within it as well. So we can use these kind of attributes to differentiate the images from each other, and then feed that into the musical process. And the other thing you might have picked up on the film, and it's worth maybe commenting on, and Kate might want to come in and comment on this, but in the performance, she destroys the artwork as it's created. Kate, do you want to comment on that part of the process?
Yeah, I guess, well, we are at the end of the day also creating a story. So the narrative centered around, like, is AI good or bad? So each scene had a particular edge to it in maybe the music element, but also in the visual component. So for instance, in the community scene, and it's I like it, I call it dramaturgical drawing gestures. So I can put some additional emotion in, and I guess destroying artwork in itself is maybe yeah, has quite an unusual impact, I guess. I've been told that there's a shock through the audience, for instance, and so people have invested in a particular artwork, and then when it's destroyed in whatever manner it is, then yeah, I hope that the story then they reflect on the meaning of the actual drawing, and maybe the meaning has changed. So that's the transformational kind of thing, and it also helps the flow between different scenes. So there's also the choreography in mind, and producing different scenes within a storyline.
Cool. So I think in terms of what we were going to discuss, just to summarize, the project is quite ambitious. There's a beautiful art that Kate creates. There's the marriage of art and music, which is incredibly difficult to try and achieve. And then we're still really just at the very beginnings of that. And we're looking, you know, to develop that further in the future. But the process was also to pose the question about whether is AI good or bad, because that's something that's very relevant in today's society.
So much, Andy and Kate and Jack. I'd like to warmly encourage everybody who's been watching and learning from your film and from your discussions to post any questions now that you might have in the Q&A box on the screen. Any comments, any feedback, you know, any just your impressions, you know, what sort of your thoughts and feelings are in response to this project and this.
So the project, Amy, we're struggling to hear you. I think you're sounding a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a bit fuzzy. But just to comment, I mean, the project is continuing. So we're looking. I mean, all of us are looking in our various ways to try and improve the process and improve the output. I've got a current project student, Bethany, who I think is in the chat. I saw Bethany in there, so if it is Bethany, then hi. Who's going to be looking at working on the project this year for her undergraduate project. Jack's also continuing to look at opportunities to help us to proceed. And then Kate is also looking at it from an artistic perspective, because obviously she's done the performance, and then where else can it go, and how else can she use the technology? So that's, you know, these are areas that we're looking at. And so, you know, we hope that this is not the end of the journey, and it's just really just the beginning of what we're about to achieve.
Fantastic, thank you. Can you hear me more clearly now?
You're still a bit robotic. I don't know why.
A bit closer. I might be just a bit far from my computer.
Sean is saying, try switching off the mic off and on again.
Better. Can you hear me more clearly now?
It's the same. Yeah, but we can hear you. It's just yeah. This is the problem with nowadays, isn't it? Technology is great when it works.
Yeah. A couple of questions. So you could look, if you look into the Q&A box rather than have me read them in a
Yeah.
big voice, if perhaps you could just read them yourselves and then respond, please.
Should we start with Michael's question? I think he was first in. The question is, how many images are taken and processed by the camera / AI in any given performance? That's quite a good question. I lost count.
Well, yeah, it was generally one scene takes about 4 or 5 minutes. So each scene would like in real time it would take about 4 or 5 minutes all in all. And within that image we would break up it into different elements, and I think it would be about 12 to 14, something like that, pictures to be taken during each scene.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've still got a copy of the performance and other, kind of run-throughs that we did. So yeah, there's approximately a dozen images produced through, so objects within the thing. So if you think of the community one, there was the figures and then the blocks. So the figures would often be broken into two. Kate would break them into two, so she would do half of the figure, and that would count as an object, and then the other half, and then plus the big blocks. So if you count all those up, it's about a dozen.
So we'll move on to the next question. Quite a long one, but I've pre-read it and I really like it. You mentioned the AI produced sounds that were quite unpleasant, and that had an element of danger. Am I right in saying it only seems dangerous because of how we experience the world and how we interpret the sound? If that is true, then the unpleasant, dangerous sounds we could hear could be happy / safe to the AI. So therefore, it's a question of how we begin to communicate our emotions with AI. If AI is even possible to experience emotion, and if it ever is able to experience emotion, will it ever be able to convey this emotion through music?
That's a really good question. I mean, AI is not capable of experiencing emotion, and that's the first thing. So AI will simulate emotion. It can do that relatively well, but if we think about, I mean, we project onto AI things. We project reasoning onto AI, which it doesn't do. All AI, all artificial intelligence methods are numerical based. They're summations of numbers that produce an output, which is another number, or bunch of numbers. So, and then we interpret that output and we put meaning on top of it. So it can't experience emotions. And I think it's a very insightful question, because I think you're right in that two people can experience the same piece of music differently, just depending on their own mood or their own kind of understanding of AI. So if they feel threatened by AI and they know the music is created by AI, it might just automatically put them at edge and might not like it. They might not like it if it sounds good, whereas they might actually like it if it sounds bad. And the same the other way around. So if someone who's really invested into AI might actually prefer it to be perfect, and then if it makes mistakes, be like, oh, I don't like that. But it might be, so it just totally depends on the perspective of the person as to what they take out of the performance, and that's actually exactly our intention.
I hope
that answers
on
your question.
On top of that, in terms of, like Andy saying, it's a very much a human element, emotion. But if we're able to kind of understand, now this is more of an answer for how do we understand the human brain, and then how can we mimic that through the AI? And I think that's an attitude that a lot of AI specialists have, that the AI is essentially a copy of the human brain. So do we look at color, for instance, of the art, and then say, well, should color dictate the mood of the music? Or is it the shape and structure, or is it all of these things? So a lot of intricacies do change people's emotions, and then what we would aim to do is get as close to that as we possibly can. But is that possible? That's what we need to find out. So I hope that answers the question.
It's a question for Kate. how is it to get the AI to interpret your art? Does the music influence the artwork, assuming you hear it while painting?
Yeah, I do hear it. And yeah, music and sounds do influence your gestures. I seem to go faster with like maybe quite a, like a direct thing, but yeah, you go faster with more upbeat music. And so generally, it does influence. It's like, as Andy said, this is a prototype. So in the disruptive kind of nature of it, that I have to stop and start drawing, I guess that doesn't necessarily help the flow of my work. Working with other like improvisers and composers in a more creative way, I do see that I draw differently while if I'm on my own. So it definitely has an effect.
That's something I think we're interested to explore actually with Kate. You know, to get her to use the technology, and then she can control the music. So if you think of the of an image that she a canvas that she paints, again, if you think of the community one that we showed with the blocks and the figures, if she starts with a figure, that's going to have a different profile and different frequencies and so on, which will produce a certain type of motif. Where if she starts with a block, it will have it will start differently, which then means the music will progress in a different way. So, you know, Kate could play with things. She could paint, she could do the same painting in a different order and get a completely different musical output. And that's something that we're actually quite keen to explore and to see how Kate can play with it in that way. Because this is where we're saying, is it a new art form? Well, I mean, that's a very subjective answer and question, I guess. But I mean, the fact that you can completely change it would suggest that you can, and it's completely within Kate's control as to how that then would transpire.
And to add that to further, like you could have music playing that then converts that into a picture as well. So you can like have the process vice versa. So that's another, idea to explore.
Yeah, that's one of the future directions for us to look at as well. That's got its own challenges, let's say, but yeah, that's also something to look at, because the process, in theory, can go both ways because it's completely transparent and explainable, which is also unlike most AI.
Kate, I think there was another question there saying, like, how does it feel to have the AI interpret the art? Which, yeah, it's quite interesting to hear from your perspective how it's watching you as such.
Well, I go back to when we were rehearsing Jack for the first time on stage, not in front of anyone, just for ourselves. And I started painting, and all of a sudden these voices appeared. And Jack can attribute certain instruments to the scene, so he has control over that, and he opted for vocal for people's voices and this choir. And then we were in this large lecture theater, and all of a sudden these people, whoever they were like singing to us, and that was quite an extraordinary experience. Like, who is this? And wow,
it was visceral, wasn't it? I mean, all of us were affected by that, and we didn't record it, unfortunately, as well. I wish we had now, because it was such
first impressions. Absolutely, it was incredibly powerful, wasn't it? So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Next question: do you always destroy the paintings, or are there any that you ever keep?
Yes, because Jack and I can both say that she does keep some of them, because she's gave us one as a gift. So she definitely doesn't destroy them all.
Yeah, well,
that took a lot of persuasion as well.
Yeah, well, I'm quite precious about I guess yeah, when it's a good drawing, I'm quite precious about it. But I've learned in these productions that I run with other collaborations that, it adds an element. So in the beginning, it felt like a bit like destroying, an animal or something like that. But I do feel it adds meaning in various ways to a particular story. I mean, the gesture is not just to make a gesture; that it needs to add meaning to the story. So so every act is a deliberate one. Whether I, destroy it in a more aggressive way or more gentle way with a circular motion or something like that. So I do think it helps the flow of the transitioning between scenes and the dialogue and create conflict potentially. And so I do think there is reason. There's always reason to do a particular thing, and yeah. So, but then it's part of the evolving process, because it's not a static piece of work. So it is transitioning, it's transforming and developing. So yeah, it's a whole story, not just a piece of piece of art in that sense.
Next question: what do you expect from the new participants? I'm not quite sure what that means.
Could do one maybe.
Yeah, could you please elaborate on that in the Q&A, please, and we'll move on to the next question right now. We'll come back to it if you're still here. The next question after that would say, would you have to create different algorithms for the AI if different art motifs were used, or different mediums like pencil, chalk, etc.?
So that's an interesting one from a technical perspective. One of the issues we actually had in the paint, when we did it live, I mean, Jack, you remember this one, was that the paint dries. So as the paint dries, it changes color. So the AI would pick this up, and it causes problems actually. And we didn't fully solve it in the live performances. We've subsequently looked at that. So different medium will have different challenges, and I think that there are definitely different technical things that would come into the interpretation of the strokes. I mean, one of the things, if you think about, we could look at is like the strength of, you know, if you like chalk, for example, it might, I mean, Kate would know this from an artistic perspective, but just from an image processing perspective, how we interpret those brush strokes and how we interpret the colors and how we interpret the strength of the connection between the artist and the page, and all these things can be added into the process. So it's not so much different algorithm as how do you interpret what the artist is doing. So what techniques do we need, image processing techniques do we need to be able to encapsulate what is being presented on the screen, on the page? Kate, do you want to comment on the artistic side?
Well, I don't know, I would only add that the painting, well, I don't know, I don't really have much. the using paint, it's a very fluid medium, so it helps, it really helps the drawing, and yeah, I really like working in it, and I think from an aesthetic point of view, it's quite nice to look at. I tried, you know, actually my first love is pencil and graphite drawing. I mean, if I can get away with people looking at pencil drawings, I mean, I would do that, because I think pencil drawings, it's grainy texture and soft and sharp and all within one medium, you know, it's astonishing. And it's so exposing, and you can really see every mark that an artist creates. And it has such a simple beauty. So pencil drawings is really what I look for in exhibitions. But people often want color, they want paint, and therefore, you know, this ink is kind of a happy medium, if you will. So, but it does work very well with the fluidity and things like that. And you do get very surprising marks because the tool, it's not that, yeah, you can't always control it. So you kind of have to go with the flow anyway, which kind of is part of the performative application. So it suits it.
What I'd say, that in direct answer to the question, is the AI wouldn't care. It's, you know, so you do the image processing on the mark. So imagine the same images that Kate's done if you did it in chalk, say, instead. The AI, it depends how we do the image processing as to whether the AI would actually see any difference. So the AI, in many respects, wouldn't see unless we were explicitly giving it the tools to be able to see the difference between them. Otherwise, it would treat them exactly the same.
So thank you guys for that. So we've got another question here. Do you feel that if you limit the AI and its choices so that we may find it more pleasant, or at least less ominous, it would no longer be the AI's music? It's quite an interesting one, actually, because I feel the original with Markov chain, we kind of restricted the AI's choice in that, but it was kind of more of a guide than a. So if we were to refine the guide a wee bit more, would that be taken away from the AI? That's probably a question for you, Andy. I'm a bit of a loss there.
No, I think it is a really good question. I think that the process that we've got in some respects can be thought of as relatively primitive. What I'd like to do is to develop the AI so that it's actually more in control of the music that it's creating. The Markov chain that Jack has referred to is you could think of it as a cheat in a way, because we're using the Beatles' knowledge, we're using Bach's knowledge to seed the decisions that the AI makes. What I prefer to do is have the AI learn from musical rules. And so in that way, it would have full ownership of the process. I mean, ideally, this is one of the things, it's the direction we wanted to take. So for example, imagine a little band. So you've got a drummer AI. So the AI learns to do a beat and cymbals and things. And then you've got another guitar AI. So it's doing a melody. And then you've got a bass. So it's doing something else. And then a vocal type thing, which would be more not a real vocal, but just something in that range. So the AIs would be separate and they would have to listen to each other like a jazz ensemble. And they would have to interact and respond to what each other's doing. So that requires the AIs to understand some form of musical structure. It needs them to listen to each other in real time and then make decisions in real time and then to enact them. So that's kind of where I want to get to, so that the AIs are fully in control of the process and are able then to respond. And they're seeded by, Kate's art. That's the fundamental part of the process. So that's kind of the vision. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing to remember is the correlation. So composition of drawing is in space and composition in music is in time. So that's the obvious difference. But there is like a possibility to create physical parameters that tell you what this compositional structure is, for instance, in the artwork, and the balance, where they are in relation to each other, these objects, and where they are on the page. And this is what Andy said, like the golden spiral, the 1/3 rule that nature has, and we see that all around us. You can apply that to a painting, but also it exists in music. So again, those are potentially physical parameters that you can play with and potentially correlate to each other. So, and obviously, the time element in a evolving painting is very much there instead of using a static painting. So that's then the advantage of drawing live in that sense.
So I think the only comment I'd probably add on top of that is that we are not necessarily restricting the AI into you can only play like this. It's kind of like if you were to teach somebody how to play to compose a guitar, so we would say, right, these are some rules, this is what sounds good, right, go and be creative, go and create something. And I think we're going to do that every time, but driven by Kate's artwork. And that's the really important part. So it's the AI needs to understand how to compose music, but also needs to be able to say, okay, I need to take my first protocols, Kate's artwork. So it's almost like if we stuck a musician in front of to watch Kate's painting evolve and say that to them, play what you think sounds what this painting looks like, which sounds a bit crazy when you say it out loud, but that's essentially what we're trying to achieve. So I hope that answers that question.
That leads nicely on to the next question. Yeah.
Is this process and the interaction with with music live encourage you to paint more figurative or abstract?
Well, I mean, I love figurative drawing, but you can be quite abstract in your figures. And what I'm conscious of in a production, when you have, like, say, 5 scenes or 5 acts, if you will, in the traditional theatre structure, I'm very conscious that I need to keep having the audience interested in my drawing. So you can't draw the same all the time. So you need to change either your materials or the perspective. So this is why, for instance, the last scene in the film that you just saw, you see we're looking down on this woman, and it's more a portrait style composition. But in the community scene, these figures are a little bit more expressive and a little bit more abstract, but it's still a figurative thing. But in the child play kind of scene, these little children are quite illustrative and quite not necessarily that abstract. So I do want, I'm conscious, to like change my color, my materials, my perspective, and the way I draw, just to keep, you know, the audience interested, because you're asking quite a lot um, from someone to otherwise, you know, sit through something that's, you know, you're drawing all the same. And this is another reason why, you know, use dramatical drawing gestures, because yeah, if you draw the same all the time on the same, then it becomes maybe, well, in my mind, maybe a bit boring to watch. But if you have a big stroke or you splash water or things like that, so it's all about choreography and being really conscious about the audience, which is watching you in real time, which is very different to maybe a visual artist in the studio when it's creating that static piece of canvas. It's yeah, a different thing, component to think of in that sense.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Is the process reversible? Could you recreate the art from just the music that is created?
So I touched on this earlier. So in theory, yes, it's definitely possible to do this. If we had some music coming in, the AI is explainable, it's transparent. So we could, instead of doing the arts attributes to the music, we could go from the music attributes to the art, and then we could then create some you know, something on a canvas or something digital anyway. So in theory, yes, we haven't done it, but in theory, it's possible.
And I think another point which would be quite interesting to see if the shapes that the AI would create, are they similar to the shapes that Kate's painted as an input for the current model? So, or would it be something completely different? Would it understand the sort of process that goes through Kate's head in terms of balance and harmony, this different shapes, the color? Would the AI be able to reconstruct something like that? And I think that's something we'd probably need to investigate as well.
Yeah, I mean, actually, there's an interesting technical answer to that as well, Jack, which you'll know from your thesis. But the nodes within the AI has nodes just like our brain has nodes. It just has a very small number of them. When the nodes learn things, the nodes become specialists in particular types of Kate's art. And if you think about it, we have nodes. One node will be specialist on a block, say, picture, and another one will be specialist on, say, a figure, say, picture. And then we might have a node in between. And it is in between. It's physically in between. So it's in between, a distance between the block, and it's in between a figure. So then we get boundaries for what these nodes are able to represent. So the boundary of the block isn't just a block. It will actually include a little bit of intricacy, depending on how the SOM has learned, how the AI has learned the images. And that also is what gives it its discretion. So when we talk about it generating music, what it's also doing is it's looking at, okay, so I've got a picture, I think the picture's this type of picture, but what is the range of pictures that I actually understand? And that gives the range of musical notes then that it can start to create as well. So yeah, as we get deeper into it, it gets more complicated, but it actually has quite a lot of freedom based on what it's learned. So it depends a little bit on the attributes of the AI. If we make the AI bigger, then the nodes become more and more specialized. So if we have more nodes, those nodes become better at specializing for a particular type of figure. Whereas if you make it smaller, they're more general. And the general nature of it allows us more freedom with the musical side. So I hope that answers it. I don't know, Jack, what'd you say?
I'd say that was a great description. Yeah, I totally get
Thank you.
with the values. With the values that each node has, we're able to kind of be able to recreate. I think it would just be the recreating side, so taking the values and doing something with them, that would be the biggest challenge there in order to reverse the process.
We'd need equivalent to the Markov chain for the music, for the art, to be able to do it. So that's what we need at this time. But I mean, I want to explore other ways of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question: when painting, does Kate have an idea of what you're putting on the page before you start, or do you ever find that your artwork can be affected by what you hear?
Well, in this production, I knew what I was going to paint, because, yeah, I guess it's a bit like rehearsing a theatre piece, and we wanted a particular storyline. So I knew what I was going to paint. I guess it will, you know, affect when I improvise with maybe in another production. Then, yeah, what I hear, it does affect the way I draw in that sense. So, yeah.
Next question: would you or have you ever, while Kate's painting, measure the pressure she's using on the paper and feed that into the AI?
No, we haven't. We haven't done that. I mean, it's something that would have been. It's just another sensor. In terms of Jack's project, we went from 0 to production within how long? 9 months, well, less probably for Jack. So there wasn't time to build in a lot of these additional things we maybe like to have done. Certainly, those are the things we can look at. I mean, if the thing is getting a sensor into so it might be under the page, or if it's in Kate's.
It can be on the board actually, because in another production again, for instance, I have mics under the board, so it's another way of creating music. So the mics are under the drawing board, so while I'm drawing, it picks up the sound. So similar kind of system could very well be used. In digital, like drawing kind of devices in iPads, or I don't know, I've never used them, but I know you like when you draw and you put more pressure on your screen, the mark will be broader or have a bolder kind of tone. But yeah, it is an interesting parameter to take into account, because it does really, influence the way you draw, the energy that you put, like the angle of your pencil, the pressure of your pencil. It's all really, how it's equivalent to tone on a piano. So how a musician puts his hands on the keys. So it's that feeling of your tool and your hand to the substrate you're drawing on. It is very important.
And that sensor, if we could get a sense like that, then it would be directly related to loudness of the musical notes. So it would be a really good input to have, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Could you take previous works of art, maybe classical works, and have the AI create music? Or does it work best to create music while Kate's painting?
So the issue here is that the process we're focused on Kate's process of painting. So the painting is a white canvas, and then it's being painted in real time, and we're taking those elements as she paints. So a completed work of art is a different problem, because it's completed. We don't have a white canvas, and we need to work out what the elements are to be able to do that. So that's the problem, really. It's a different kind of problem. And which element would you start with first? So if you imagine any painting you've got, where'd you start? And how do you break the painting up into individual elements? So it's a separate problem, but it could be solved. So you could do it as long as you're able to break the painting up. And some paintings will obviously be easier than others to do that.
Well, and this is also why we use this ink calligraphic kind of approach, because it's very clean. So we need to have like clean marks and clearly defined, shapes and elements. So this is why a minimalistic kind of approach with this particular ink is very useful, because it's it creates a way where we can build up and get some fundamental understanding of how this could correlate to music. So it's building up the parameters. So a very minimalistic calligraphic kind of painting is more easy to break down in elements. And also you could you could get the composition, you can get the golden spiral. It's far easier to assess in that way than a painting with multiple layers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your questions. I think they've really been a great vehicle for a discussion of where this project can go next, and new avenues. So unfortunately, due to COVID-19, you were saying that the kind of your plans to take this into music venues and nightclubs have been put on hold. But do you have any other plans for this project that perhaps you can move forward with despite the restrictions that we're currently living under?
Well, yeah, I mean, Kate has a collaborator who is a classical pianist, and she does improvisation. I mean, that's one thing she studies. So down in Manchester. So that's someone that we're collaborating with to help to get an understanding of the musical side. I have an undergraduate project student who is starting this year as well. And we're still going to investigate kind of these. I mean, like you said, I mean, it would have been great to have done this in a nightclub and have dance music pumping out, which is created in the same way. I would still like to do that. And so we can look at doing Kate could look at doing live events in a similar way, and we could investigate different styles of music, and then how Kate, which ones she likes the best, really, and what she responds to, and and how she likes interacting with it, like some of the questions we're saying. So that's kind of future direction from my perspective.
Great. Christine is asking, when will the recording be available? We'll let everybody know once it has been put up somewhere. We're not sure yet is the answer to that, but we will come to some arrangement, and I'm sure media services will help us with that. And so we will keep everybody, all of the attendees, posted when it comes to the availability of this recording. Thank you. Well, I'm conscious that our time is drawing to a close. I just had one, if we have maybe just time for one more question. So I think I was really struck by your choice of the Beatles, wonderful, creative, classics of the pop, 20th century pop, and then Bach as virtuoso classical composer. Being from the west of Ireland, I suppose I'm just curious about what might happen if you were to feed in a load of Scottish and Irish instrumental music, for instance. Have you considered expanding the musical repertoire of the AI? Yeah.
No, we have. I mean, Philip Glass was another one. I mean, Beatles is such an obvious choice. They're the most popular band probably ever, and the choices they made in their notes were obviously good choices. So we thought, well, let's make our music nicer by using the Beatles. And then we looked at other things as well. So I think, Jack, can you remember what they all were, the choices that we used?
I actually can't remember. There was a few.
Philip Glass was one, wasn't it?
Philip Glass was certainly one. It was Bach, and I think it was just the Beatles after that. But there was several Beatles songs that we took into consideration. But to answer the question more directly, I mean, there's a lot. So when we say we analysed was the notes. We didn't necessarily analyse the instruments used. So maybe there'd be different instruments involved with like Scottish and Irish sort of instrumental music. And I think that would also be another interesting kind of endeavours to investigate, what instruments sound better, because that was a really big part of the performance as to, well, I'd look at Kate's art that she was intending on painting and say, right, what instrument that I have currently in front of me. So we used a MIDI type of software. And I was like, so what, out of all these kind of sound fonts is what they were called, what sort of instruments can I use? And I basically had to go through and figure out, well, which ones sound firstly okay, and then secondly, which ones kind of suit each scene better. So there was still more input from I would argue there was a bit too much input from myself in that. And what we'd like to do is have the AI kind of decide like what instruments to use, and then that's another decision again, and another layer we can add to the system. But like I said, it would be really interesting to have something, something very vibrant like Scottish and Irish folk music in a performance, because I think that it would be incredibly engaging and interesting to see as well.
Yeah, different rhythms, different chords, different harmonies, different chord progressions. I mean, that's what identifies that music in that way. So that's what would come out. It would be fascinating to do. I mean, I want to do jazz and things as well, just to see, blues. I want to do blues, because they have different kind of structures, don't they? So.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think, it just remains to me to thank you so warmly, Kate, Andy, and Jack, for this absolutely riveting expose of your project and your working methods, and how your research feeds into it in all three of your domains. So thank you for being so generous with your time and with your expertise in your fields. I want to just also mention that this event has taken place thanks to the generous support of Aberdeen City Council, and as well as, of course, the University of Aberdeen's media services invaluable support and help. So we're very grateful. yes, please do keep in touch. And when COVID-19 and its restrictions are a thing of the past, I hope that we can get together again in person and perhaps even have a performance, of this project on the University of Aberdeen campus. So I look forward to seeing you before too long, hopefully. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for your questions and for your time.
Thank
Thank-
you.
thank
Thanks.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thank
You're
you.
very welcome. All the best.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.